Okay, so let's get into it. As far as preamble, I suppose there is one, but it's going to be more of a review of the Old Testament, because I keep saying how you got to understand the Old Testament in order to understand the fall feasts, in order to understand the book of the Revelation. If you don't have a really strong background in the Old Testament, it's really hard to understand the importance of so many things. Even the New Testament, it's really hard to understand the New Testament if you don't understand the feasts, because I already said to YouTube before that when you understand which day Christ was teaching which thing to which people and what he was saying to them, that's when you get the real deep understanding of the New Testament. So we're going to start with just a little bit of the Old Testament and a few basic things that we need to understand. First, we're gonna talk about really briefly. We're gonna talk about the Abrahamic Covenant. Okay, so we remember that Jehovah had made a covenant with Abraham, and for today's purposes, all we need to remember is that this covenant basically was that Abraham was going to he was going to cross over, E-B-E-R, he's going to cross over, he's going to leave Babylon, and he's going to settle into a new place, okay? He's going to settle what was called the land of Canaan, even though it should not have been the land of Canaan. It was not given to Canaan and his, sorry, I'm thinking in Spanish. Gente, Kristen, help me.
His people.
Thank you, his people. That still happens to me, I swear. Canaan, just FYI, was supposed to settle the western side of Africa, northwestern side of Africa, Morocco, and that sort of area, if I remember correctly. Where do we find this? This is found in ancient Hebrew writings, and it's also found in the book of Jubilees, I believe. If not, it's Enoch, but I believe it's Jubilees. Yeah,
which is in the Apocrypha, if people who are watching don't know what that is.
Not in the Apocrypha, but it is an apocryphal writing. It is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls found. But it's very fragmented. So basically, we only have a few copies. We have one from Ethiopia. We have one from, I don't know, different areas. We still have yet to get a pure copy of that. So remember, if it's an apocryphal writing, it's to be looked at as a historical record and not a scripture. But anyway, there are many different sources that say that Canaan was not supposed to be living in the land where he settled, that area was actually given to Shem by Noah. And incidentally, of course, Abraham, the first Hebrew, because Hebrew, that comes from to come out of. So Abraham, the first Hebrew, the first person to leave Babylon, was actually a rightful inheritor of that area, what we call today Palestine. I've already said I feel a little, I don't really love that word for that area because, of course, Palestine comes from the word Philistine or Philistine, which were the mortal enemies of Israel. So I don't know, I always feel kind of weird calling it after their enemies. But anyway, the important thing is that Abraham, the covenant was he was going to inherit this land. Eventually, he was told he did not have the population to inherit the land, and it was supposed to be from the river Euphrates all the way to the river Nile. So that was supposed to be, that land is part of the Abrahamic Covenant, but that it was going to be inherited piece by piece by piece as Abraham's family grew. On the reverse side, Abraham, of course, was going to follow Jehovah. He was going to follow his commandments, keep his commandments. And also as part of that Abrahamic covenant, we know his family was going to be enlarged. Also, here's the important thing about what we're going to talk about today. Part of the Abrahamic covenant is that Abraham and his family were going to be a nation of kings and priests to the world. They were supposed to be charged with going out and functioning as teachers and priests of Jehovah. And that was the Abrahamic covenant. Now, as we know, didn't quite work out that way, at least in the time of Israel and the 12 tribes. We know there were a lot of family issues, like so many of us have, lots of dysfunction there, the whole let's kill our youngest brother sort of thing. And he, of course, gets shipped off to Egypt. He ends up being the family's savior in the literal sense, as far as physical sense. And he saves them from that awful famine that they were experiencing in the land where Abraham had settled his family. They go over to Egypt. They stay there for, this is in dispute, but at least several hundred years, maybe a couple hundred years, depending on the source that you're reading. And then Moses is told that he must become the next to Eber, to leave, to cross over, to get out of Egypt. And of course, Passover happens. We talked about this before, right? We talked about this in the spring feasts. So this is where we're going to kind of begin right here. Okay. So Passover begins in Egypt. Of course, this is when the angel of death passes over the homes of Israel, who paint their doors and their lintels with the lamb's blood. Okay. Right. And that's the Passover. Okay. And of course, the next day, or that day, if you're looking at it from the Hebrew perspective, because remember, their days begin at sundown. Okay. So that day, so the morning, the Pharaoh tells them, you know what, get out, go do your 3-day feast in the desert to honor your God, and then come back. Of course, we know they didn't. They arrive at, let's see, I have this timing written down here. They arrive, okay, hang on. So remember, they go to Sukkot, they gather up Joseph's remains. Remember how Joseph said to take his mummy back and bury it in the land of his fathers, okay? So they go to Sukkot, which is Saqqara. A lot of people tell you Sukkot is on the very far northeastern side of Egypt on the delta. It's highly unlikely. Sukkot is probably Saqqara, that Egyptian word Saqqara, where that, remember we talked about the granaries and the step pyramid? Just give me if you remember. We don't have to get into that. Okay, cool. Okay, excellent. So they go back to that area, most likely. They go to Imhotep, probably. Joseph's tomb, which, by the way, is empty, right? Nobody can find the body of Imhotep. I have a suspicion that they're never going to. Then they take Joseph's remains. This is biblical now, okay? So this is scripture. They take his remains and they leave. They go, they hit, let me see here. They travel through the Wadi and they get to the beach of, today it's called Nuweiba, most likely. This is in Egypt. They get to that beach. And this is where Ron Wyatt comes into play. You can look this up, okay? So they get to Egypt, and this happens on which day? I can't remember which day this happens, guys. I think this happened on Aviv 15. I think it took them. No, that's not right, you guys. Dang it, I can't remember which feast day it corresponds to, but it does correspond with a feast day. I'll have to get back to you guys on that one. Okay. No, here it is right here. They crossed the Sinai Peninsula. It took them 7 days and nights. It was miraculous that they crossed from Passover down to Saqqara, down to Nuweiba. Took them a week to get there. And then they're at the Wadi, and then they cross. So if that's the case, guys, then that means that would have been the Bikurim, right? Most likely it would have been the Bikurim, depending on what day the Sabbath fell. Anyway, so they get there after 7 days. Moses parts the waters. They go across, of course. And now here's the thing. A lot of people think that the Sinai Peninsula is where Mount Sinai is. Highly unlikely. Why do we think it's Mount Sinai? I will tell you why. Because within 25 years, 350 AD, Constantine told his mom to go around the Holy Land and to pick out sites of the Old Testament. So she ended up going to this area and looking at a mountain and pointing at it and saying, look, that's Mount Sinai right there. And so that's why we today say that that's Mount Sinai. Why can it not be Mount Sinai? I will tell you why. It's because it says it's Shaul, it's Paul, who tells us that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. He tells us this in the New Testament. And Josephus tells us also, the ancient Jewish historian. And we're also told by many different sources in the Old Testament, Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Now, why can't it be the Sinai Peninsula? Sinai Peninsula is Egypt. Egypt owned it then. Egypt owns it now. The Israelis held Mount Sinai for a very, very short time right after the 7 Years' War, and then they gave it right back to the Egyptians shortly after, or the 6 Days' War. So Sinai's in Egypt. It's not in Arabia, and it never has been. Arabia is Arabia. Today, the Saudi family is in charge of Arabia, therefore we call it the Saudi Arabia. The other reason we know this, that Sinai is not in the Sinai Peninsula, is because we know that Sinai is in the area where Jethro was settled, Moses' father-in-law, which is in the land of Midian. And even if you today go to a map and look up Midian, it will show you the very far northwestern side of Arabia. The other interesting thing, what is the deal about Nueva? There is actually a land bridge between Nueva and Saudi Arabia, and this land is literally a land bridge, okay? On either side of the land bridge, the water in the Red Sea is extremely deep. It's very, very deep. But you have this little strip. You can see it you can just look it up on Google Earth. And you can see this little tiny strip of land that goes from the beach at Nueva, which would have been the only place large enough for Israel to have gathered. And P.S., there's a wadi right behind them, a big valley. So they were literally stuck, just like the Bible says. They're stuck there. They can't run anywhere. They've got water in front of them, and they've got Pharaoh coming behind them, and there's nowhere to run. And so it's the only place where they could have crossed over. Now, sometimes we want to massage the scriptures and we say, oh, it's probably the Reed Sea, not the Red Sea, because we one of the Messianic Jews I watch a lot of times, he's hilarious. And he says, sometimes we treat God like a little man that needs help across the street. We don't want to believe. We don't want to believe what the scriptures say. We don't want to believe they actually crossed the Red Sea. How is that even possible? Oh, no. It could be this. But from what I've studied and learned from my extensive studies, God doesn't need our help. He doesn't need our help to massage the scriptures and to make things work the way that we think that they would scientifically. If he said it was the Red Sea, it was the Red Sea, okay? So the part of this Red Sea would be found in the Gulf of Aqaba, in case you want to look it up. So there's this land bridge there. Side note, there are coral-encrusted chariot wheels and chariot pieces and parts on the bottom, strewn all over the place on this land bridge. Another interesting piece, one of my favorite pieces, is there is an actual gold chariot wheel with 4 spokes. And we know these were used for sure. We know that these were used in the 18th dynasty because of Tutankhamun's tomb that was found intact. They had all sorts of chariots, all sorts of art depicting these. There were 6 spokes wheels, and the pharaoh, King Tut, is on a 4-spoked chariot wheel in some of the art depictions. But we also have his chariots. And so if you go down and you look, a lot of people have disputed Ron Wyatt in this finding, okay? But here's the thing. Modern people, modern day, so Ron Wyatt was 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? People now dive down in this Gulf of Aqaba today, and they have documented the exact same thing that Ron Wyatt saw. The other thing, there are 2 pillars, one on each side. There's one on the beach of Nueva, and there's one on the beach in Saudi Arabia. The one in Saudi Arabia was taken and a marker left in its place. The Saudi family took it away and they put it wherever they're keeping it, and they put a marker in its place to show where it was. The one on the Egyptian side, they found that one floating in the water nearby, and they put it back on its base. And it's written in Proto Hebrew, so it's not in modern Hebrew characters, because of course the modern Hebrew characters come from a Babylonian influence, but it's in Proto Hebrew, and it says basically this is Moses and the crossing of the children of Israel. That's what those two pillars say. And it says that on the pillars that they were erected by King David to commemorate that event. So that's a little bit of a side note, but gives us a little bit of background. Why is this so important? It's important to understand where this happened, truly happened, because this all does have to do with the fall feasts, okay? So if Ron Wyatt is correct, if he truly did find the crossing, and if Mount Sinai truly is in Mount Arabia, or in Arabia, if Mount Sinai is in Arabia, we know exactly where it is. Ron Wyatt also, at the peril of his life, he almost died in discovering this mountain. He found a mountain and it has a charred blackened top. And if you dig into the rock a little bit, it's not charred all the way through. It's just the surface of the mountain. And it's a very tall mountain. It's got a sharp peak like this, and it's just black at the top of this mountain. At the base of the mountain, they found an altar. They found an altar of unhewn stones, which is, of course, the commandment. They had to create altars of unhewn stones. Also at the base, they have found remnants of 12 pillars. What did Moses build at the base? 12 pillars. Also, can you guys shut my door for me, please? Thank you. Also, they found corrals of animals to the animal sacrifice right next to the altar. You know what else they found? They found a gigantic altar of unhewn stones with depictions of Apis and Hathor, the two cow gods of ancient Egypt. Okay, so we're going to get into that too in just a minute. So if you're interested, go and check out those discoveries. It's very, very interesting. So the important thing for us today is they crossed over. Okay, now they're at the base of Sinai. They're not in Egypt. Keep that in mind. Okay. And they would not have been north in the northern part of Sinai Peninsula either, because that's where their, I think it was the Phoenicians, somebody lived up there that would have killed them instantly, which is another reason why Lehi avoided that area also on the northern side of the Sinai Peninsula. You had to be really careful around there if you were a Hebrew. So they came over and, oh, by the way, that land bridge has a 6-degree slope. So they've already done all the math and everything. And definitely crossable. And it's 5,000 feet of a drop off on each side of that land bridge, which is crazy. Okay, where can you find Paul saying that Sinai is in Arabia? This is in Galatians 4:25. We know that the children of Israel spent about 3 years in Arabia. Okay, making sure I got all that. Yeah, looks good. All right, let's move on. So they went over the land bridge. They're at the base of Sinai. Now we fast forward just a little bit, and it is going to be 47 days after the Passover. So it's been 47 days since the children of Israel left Egypt behind, and that Jehovah saved them from Pharaoh and his army. So as they are at the base of Sinai, 47 days after, Moses goes up onto the mount. He goes up onto Sinai, and he's communing with Jehovah. And Jehovah asks him to gather all the children of Israel together and to ask them if they will obey his commandments. They don't even know what the commandments are yet. Jehovah wants to test their faith. Are you going to obey my commandments before I even tell you what they are? Keeping in mind, Jehovah has already delivered them from Egypt, helped them cross the Sinai, the waters at Horeb, right? I actually can't remember if that was before or after. But anyway, they had lots of different miracles being shown to them. Obviously, they knew Jehovah was the one true and living God, okay? And so Moses goes down from the mountain, down to the base, back to the camp of Israel, which was, it turns out, they have found remnants, by the way. They have found archaeological remnants of the camp of Israel. They have found potsherds, and they have found, well, I'm not going to get into the foot markers, but they have found lots of different things. They've even found, by the way, the footprint of the original tabernacle there. They found the original footprint. with the exact dimensions and the exact orientation, north, south, east, west, orientation, found in Leviticus. So about the camp, it turns out the camp is about a mile away from the remnants that they found at the base of the mountain. So Moses goes back down to the camp, and it must have been quite a hike, and he delivers the message Jehovah sent him to take to them. He gives them the message, and then they answer him, yes, we are willing to do whatever Jehovah says. We're good. Count us in. Great. So Moses goes back up into the mountain to return and report, and he does. And he reports back to Jehovah, and then Jehovah gives him instructions to take back to the people, and he says, go back down to the people, tell the children of Israel to mikvah. Remember that word that we talked about? That's one of our vocabulary words. Tell them to mikvah, to bathe themselves, cleanse themselves. Tell them to prepare their white garments, their special white garments, to clean them thoroughly, to bleach them out in the sun. For 3 days, you are to mikvah. Have a perimeter around the base of this mountain. Do not let anyone or anything come up this mountain. If your guards see a person or a sheep or whatever trying to approach this mountain within those 3 days, you are to shoot and to kill it. Keeping in mind that the people needed to take care of the sheep and to care for their animals and to ensure they didn't get anywhere near the mountain. And that was the point. So this mountain was to stay sanctified and completely pure for 3 days during the people's mikvah, which they did. Now, 3 days later, all right, on the morning, okay, so remember, it's so hard for me to wrap my head around. Days begin at nighttime, right? But on this particular day in the morning, okay, so at sunrise, in what would have been the middle of their day of Shavuot, so it's 50 days after the Passover, okay, or 50 days, it's not right. It's 7 Sabbaths. Let me go back. It's in the spring feast. You think I'd know this by now, by heart. Okay, I can get this right. So you have the Passover, right? Then you have the Sabbath after the Passover, which you cannot calculate, right? We know that. You can't calculate ahead of time because, of course, you don't know when Aviv is going to happen, but you guys already know that, so I don't have to get into that. So you calculate from this first Sabbath after the Passover, the day after that Sabbath, what we call Sunday on the pagan calendar, right? You count 7 Sabbaths. That's the Bikurim. You count 7 Sabbaths after the Bikurim, okay? The first fruits, the feast of the first fruits. And after you count 7 Sabbaths, 7 times 7 is 49. On the 50th day after, okay? So on the 50th day, and that would be the Sunday, again, the day after the last Sabbath, you have Shavuot, okay? Feast of Weeks, all right? So Shavuot is what Christians today call the Pentecost, Pent 50, okay? That's why we count, all right? So on Shavuot, after the Passover, on the 50th day, Israel is awakened by all these trumpets sounding, these shofars, and we talked about this too. That's another one of our vocabulary words. Shofar is a ram's horn that would have been blown. But there's nobody on the mountain that they can see. But they hear these huge, this huge cacophony of horns blowing from the top of this supposedly uninhabited mountain, this empty mountain. And it's blowing so loudly that the people they're startled, they're shocked. What is this? And so they realize, oh, this is it. So they don their special white garments that have been prepared ahead of time, and they have mikvah, okay? And then they all were gathered by Moses and told to go to the base of the mountain. And as they're approaching, it's getting louder and louder and louder. Now the earth starts to tremble and quake, and there are cracks that are beginning to form in the ground. And I don't know how y'all would feel, okay? But I would be hoping there's no TP shortage then, all right? Because I would be needing it, right? This is scary. They are terrified. They are so scared. And then we are told in the Old Testament, we're told at that point, it gets even louder. Okay? It says in the scriptures, it says, then the horns got exceeding loud. So the original wasn't even considered exceeding loud. Now it's exceeding loud. By the way, if you guys have a question, just raise your hand at the bottom and then we can talk about what your question is. Because if you guys have a question while I'm talking, make sure you ask. Otherwise, I'll totally forget to address it. So it's exceeding loud at this point. The rocks are trembling. Everybody's freaked out. This is scary. And they also hear shouting at the same time. They hear this sort of jubilant shouting. So there's a shouting, there's a blowing of trumpets and quaking, and Israel is terrified of this, okay? And keeping in mind, right, they're used to the Egyptian gods who they're quiet and they're idols. And you give them food and then they give it back to you, right? And you give them your treasure and they give it back to you. They're not used to this whole live, living, unseen God thing. This is terrifying. So in Egypt, you can see your gods, right? And they don't do anything. You've got the opposite over here with Jehovah. You can't see him and he's doing stuff. It's scary. Okay, so they had been living in Egypt long enough that they had absorbed that Egyptian, what then at the time we would call the Babylonian sort of culture, the dominant culture, the popular culture is Babylon, right? Because that was the very first popular culture after the flood under Nimrod, okay? So Egypt at the time is basically Babylon, because Babylon is nothing right now. Remember how we have a difference between old Babylon and Neo-Babylon? Remember we've talked about that, okay? So this is in that time period. Babylon is nothing. So right now, Egypt is considered Babylon. So this is scary. This is different. It's scary. It's loud. But they have all followed the directions. At the same time, a fire begins. This fire. So when the trumpets are blowing and everything, this furnace ignites the top of the mountain. And it's hot and it's loud and it's crackling. And this is Arabia, guys. What's burning? The rocks? It's scary. So then when they go and Moses brings them to the base of the mountain, Moses goes into the fire after Jehovah calls, Moses, come up here. And he does. Now, you think about it, what would that do to the people below, right? If you see this man that you've been complaining against and you're like, you're kind of annoying, you know, why don't you just do stuff faster and whatever, get it done? Remember, at every turn, they're complaining to Moses that they don't like what he's doing. They want him to do it. Why did you lead us out here? We're going to die. Pharaoh's going to kill us right here at the Red Sea. Why did you do? Okay, so at this point, Moses is walking into this inferno with the quaking and the trembling and the trumpets and the shouting. And you know, at this point, you got to think at this point that the people would be like, that's a prophet. This guy is good with Jehovah. Moses goes up to the top of the mountain and let's see here. I'm just trying to make sure I'm going in order and I'm not forgetting anything. Let's go back here. Give me just a second. So remember, the people have already agreed to follow Jehovah's commandments without knowing the 3 days. And then here we go. And then, so they walked the mile. Yep, got that. Moses come up here. He does that. Okay, that's right. This is excellent. I'm glad I looked this up because I would have forgotten this. At this point, the Almighty shouts down the 10 commandments. Nothing is written down yet. Nothing is written in stone. literally and figuratively. But he's shouting down his commandments from the top of this mountain at this point. And then, let's see. The people tell Moses at this point, they say, Moses, we are terrified. We can't stand this. We can't do this. We want, you know what? We're good. We get it. You're a prophet. We're not. Jehovah's terrifying. From now on, don't make us come up here anymore. We don't even want to come to the base of this mountain. You go up there and you talk to Jehovah and then come back, and whatever he says, I don't care. Whatever it is, we're going to do it. Just please do not make us do this again. So Moses goes and he tells Jehovah what the people say. And Jehovah says, Israel has spoken well. So he's like, good, sounds good to me. And from now on, I'm going to speak to you, and they have to shema. Okay, there's one of our vocabulary words, shema. They have to hear and obey. So when you read hark or hearken, that is to shema. It's not enough to listen to and to comprehend and to remember. Your actions have to speak for your having listened. So the Hebrew word shema means to hear and to obey. So Jehovah says, Moses, the people have to shema you at this point. If they don't want to talk to me directly, okay, but they are under obligation to shema you. And another point of this is so that Israel never, ever, ever forgets this day, right? Would you ever forget that day if that happened to you? I would not. And would you pass that down from, right, Karen? And you would pass that down. You would tell your children, you would say, oh my goodness, every day on the anniversary, you'd be like, oh my goodness, this thing happened and it was crazy. But Moses is told at this point, and this is an interesting thing about this feast, you guys, because this is the only feast that was going to be observed on a different day from which the initiatory layer happened. So I'll explain what that means. This is the only feast where Jehovah says, you're not going to observe this day on Shavuot, okay? Shavuot was for a different purpose, and we already talked about the fulfillment of the Shavuot, okay? That was going to be the day that the Gentiles would begin to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, or Yeshua Mashiach, okay? Was going to be on the Shavuot, the day of the Pentecost. But of course, Israel doesn't know that at this point. But he says to Moses, you are going, from now on, you and your children, all Israel, you are going to observe this day on the first day of the 7th month. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Hebrew calendar, okay? The Hebrew calendar has gone through many, many, many changes between when it was first instituted with Moses and today. One of the changes, the months used to be called 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and so on. The only months that we have on our pagan calendar that still correspond to this are September 7th, October, November, and December. 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. And I used to wonder, I was like, why is September 7th? Why is that our 9th month? And I remember I had a teacher once tell me, when I took Latin in high school, and my teacher said, you know, Julius Caesar named July after himself, and he inserted that month. And then Augustus Caesar named August after himself, and he inserted that month. And so that's why we're off by 2 months. There was some truth in that, but that's not actually the case. So it is true that Julius and Augustus did do that, but they didn't add their months in. They just renamed the months. The reason why September is called 7th and is the 9th month on our calendar is because the calendar used to begin in the spring. So it still corresponds to that. That is why Yom Terua usually falls in September, sometimes October. Because the true calendar, God's calendar, Jehovah's calendar, begins in March, April, depending on if the barley is Aviv or not. Right? This year it was on March 26th, which was a huge year. That was right. That was a huge year for our date for us, Karen. We talked about that Joseph Smith's first vision most likely was on the 26th of March. And this year that corresponded with Aviv 1, which was really interesting to me anyway. So, hey. So anyway, it's the 7th month. Okay. So he says on the first day of the 7th month, and so this is where the calendar again comes into play. So I've already talked about it. It used to be called first, second, third. There were a couple of exceptions. One month that had its own name was Aviv, spelled A-B-I-B. So Aviv had its own month because this is the first month of the year. This is when the people would check to see if the barley was Aviv. It means ripened, basically ripe. To see if it was Aviv. And if it was not Aviv, they would have a leap year because you had quite a difference in years. Let's see here if I have it written down here. It was a difference. It's quite a difference between the Hebrew calendar and the pagan calendar. I think it's like a full 11 days difference each month or something crazy like that. I might have to get that for you later here. But let me just make sure. I have too many notes, you guys. It's not cool. All right, let me check one more page. Oh, yeah, I do. Here it is. Hebrew lunar year is about 11 days shorter than the solar year. So what that means is every 231 years, the Hebrew calendar will fall a day behind the Gregorian calendar. And we're not even on the Gregorian calendar now, right? We're on the Julian calendar. So we're all messed up. So the current Hebrew calendar is running about 1 month late. Most of the time, which is crazy. So anyway, going back to the 7th month. So on the 7th month, the first day. Now, here's another interesting thing about this feast. This is also, we've talked about this before. This is the only feast that happens on a Rosh Chodesh. Okay, the first day of a new month. All of the other feasts, all of them happen after the first day of the Rosh Chodesh. Why is that so important? It's because Rosh Chodesh, Rosh means head, Chodesh basically means month. And it's important because remember, the Israelites never knew when a new month was going to be in advance. You didn't know. You knew about when. You knew within a couple of days, probably, but you didn't know. And so the way it worked was this, okay? And this again, this is a rehearsal of Yom Terua, okay? Every Rosh Chodesh was a rehearsal of Yom Terua. So that tells you how important this feast is, right? Let me write something down because I don't want to forget to share this, but this is not the correct time to share it. So I'll share it at the end. Okay. So Rosh Chodesh is this. At the Rosh Chodesh, it meant that on the sunset now, okay? On the sunset of the day of the new moon, so when you can see the last sliver of the old moon, okay, the men in the fields would be watching for it at sunset, right? And on sunset, when they would see the last sliver of the old moon, of that month's moon, the very last shred of light that you could see on that moon, that would tell you it's time to prepare. They would go out and they would tell the people that it had been sighted, okay? Now what would happen was the people at this point would mikvah. They would cleanse themselves and they would prepare their special white garments. They would wash them clean. They would sun bleach them. And so the women would leave the grinding mills. The men would leave the fields. You would leave what you were doing. You would drop everything. You would go and you would prepare. You would prepare yourself. You would prepare your garments. And the women also, by the way, would prepare the special meal at this time for the upcoming Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because there's a difference between a Sabbath and a high Sabbath, okay? A Shabbat, Sabbath, is the weekly Shabbat. Okay, those are very important. The Lord always marks out his people by the keeping of the Shabbat. Always has, always will. A high Sabbath is different. A high Sabbath is one of the feasts. Okay, these are to be treated even more holy and sanctified than a weekly Sabbath. Now, a Rosh Chodesh is a high Sabbath. Okay, so you have to prepare, and the Sabbath is a day of rest. The ancient Hebrew women did not prepare huge elaborate meals on Shabbat. I didn't know that until very recently. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So that was one of their preparations that the women would do, is they would prepare everything possible, not, obviously not cook 100% and have it laid out on the table, but they would have all the preparations finished as far as preparing for their meal for the Rosh Chodesh. Oh, Karen, your allergies, so not cool. I feel you. I'm sorry. It's not cool. So they would be preparing for the Rosh Chodesh. So then you would get about 1.5 to 2.5 days before the new moon would be sighted, the first sliver of the new moon. And they wouldn't know. They had to depend on Yehovah even just for their calendar. So they would be watching, and they would be waiting. They would do all their preparations, and then they would go back to work. The men would go back to the fields, the women would go back to the grindstones, and they would be going back to work. And the pagans who lived in the land didn't do anything, right? They're just going on their business like there's nothing going on. And then at the first sighting of the new moon of the Rosh Chodesh, the very first sliver of light is spied by the men in the fields near Jerusalem. It had to be near Jerusalem because at that point, the men would drop what they're doing, the women would drop what they're doing, and they would leave the fields. They would leave the grindstones. They would leave it all. Pagans were still busily, doing their thing, acting like nothing's going on. And the people would rush over to the gates of the temple. Up on the Temple Mount, the temple gates are shut at sundown. So they're shut. The gates are shut. And the people would be shouting out, the new moon has been sighted. The new moon has been sighted. The temple guards would come down. They would hear, and they would choose out 2 witnesses. They would pick them out, the you and you. They'd say, come on in. And they'd take the 2 male witnesses at this point, and they would, the 2 male witnesses would go into what was called the chamber of hewn stones. And this is where the Sanhedrin would convene. Okay. And I looked this up because I'm like, how is that possible? Because not just anyone could go inside of their, sanctuary at the very, very top. And depending on where it was. And so I was like, how'd that work? And it turns out there was actually an entrance and exit on the outside of the complex at the very top there of the mount. And then there was an entrance and exit for the priests up at the top. So they would come in, the 2 witnesses would be brought in, and there was actually a chart on the wall in the Sanhedrin in this chamber. And not the full Sanhedrin, but they would have a representation there. They would have some members in there to hear the testimony of the 2 witnesses. The 2 witnesses would then be shown a chart on the wall, and the Sanhedrin representatives would say, which part of the new moon did you see? They'd be pointing to it. And from what I understand, the temple, what's the name of the temple organization right now in Israel? I can't remember it, guys. It's like the temple crew. I can't remember. Anyway, the Temple Institute. They actually have a copy of what they say this original chart looked like. So you can look it up if you want to. So they would go in, and the witnesses would be brought in one at a time. And then they would point out at what point they saw, how much of that light that they had seen. And the next one would be brought in. And then if the 2 witnesses had the same testimony, then it was considered valid. And I didn't know this until recently either. But apparently we still, the Hebrews, the Jews, still have the records, you guys, from the Second Temple period. So meaning between the Maccabees and when the temple was destroyed about 70 AD. They still have the records. So they kept very careful records, and they still do, by the way. They started doing this in, they started checking the Aviv barley in 99. I can't remember when they started Rosh Chodesh, if that was at the same time. But they have been taking records again for the last 1 to 2 decades, that they're doing this all over again. And I, by the way, I love that the current day Sanhedrin consists of Karaite Jews, Messianic Jews, and Rabbinical Jews. They all have a representation on modern Sanhedrin, which I think is pretty awesome. So they're doing this now. They're doing it today. And so after the 2 witnesses had their testimonies borne that they had seen the sighting of the new moon, then the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would be reported to, and then he would say, "Sound the trumpet." And then I believe it was the southwest corner of the temple. I don't want to tell you a wrong corner now. That would be bad. Just assume it is, unless I say otherwise. How about that? I'm going to go through in my notes and make sure that that's correct after we're done here. Believe the southwest corner. A priest would stand there, and they have found the corner. They found this little stand where the priest would stand and blow the horn. They found it at the base of the Temple Mount today. They have found a stone that was marked out as the place of the shofar, the horn. So the priest would stand there with the shofar, and he would start blowing the shofar. And then over on the Mount of Olives, you already had people prepared, because remember, they've been preparing for the last day and a half, 2.5 days. They've been preparing for the sighting of the Rosh Chodesh. And then that person on the Mount of Olives, just across from the Temple Mount, they would light the fire. And then the next mount over would see it, and they would light a fire, and they would light a fire, and they would light a fire. And if you had a small village, you would that's visible, and you didn't necessarily need a huge fire, you would just light a small torch that was on a very long pole, and you would simply just hold that up, and that was okay for your village. And so that scripture, when it talks about a city shining on a hill, that's actually referencing, this is weird, Babylon, because that fire would go all the way from the Mount of Olives all the way to what was then Babylon, in the southern part of the Tigris and Euphrates, the Fertile Crescent. And then in Babylon, the entire city would light torches all over the whole city. And you could see this from miles and miles and miles and miles away. That the Jews that had stayed in Babylon, who never went home after Cyrus the Great sent them back and told them they can go home, many of them chose to stay. And those that stayed would light all of these fires in Babylon, and it became a shining city on the hill that you could see from far, far away. And when it says to light your torch, not put it under a bushel, again, that's what it's talking about. Okay, so this is a rehearsal of the spreading of the gospel. And it's interesting to me, this is just me, this is not, something I read anywhere or anything, but it's interesting how at the end was the pagan center of the world shining with the light of Jehovah. Yes. Just talk. What do you need? Yeah, you may. So, in other words, some people are equipped with little tiny torches, and some people are equipped with these huge blazing bonfires, but it didn't matter in the end. In the end, that light spread from the Holy Land to Babylon using this fire. And then that meant that all the people, all the Hebrews in the whole land of Israel, even all the way to Babylon, all of them knew when the Rosh Chodesh was. So this happened 12 to 13 times every year. Because remember, in order for them to stay on the calendar, instead of leap days like we have, they had leap months. And what would determine a leap month was simply if the barley was not Aviv, when it was time for the 12th month, then it was time for an Adar Bet, a second Adar. So it was basically called 2nd December is what we would call it in English. So it was Adar Bet. That would be the 13th month of that year. And Jehovah was completely responsible for them having leap years and not having leap years. Everything depended on him. So let's go back to Yom Terua. Yom Terua is super important because it is the only feast that happens on a day that cannot be predicted. Nobody knows the day or hour, but they do know the time and the season. Remember, the times and the seasons translates to the Moedim, right? It translates to the feasts. So they know the feast. They recognize about when it's going to be, but nobody can say the exact day or hour because they don't know when that sliver of the new moon is going to be sighted. And I already told about how if it's foggy outside or if they can't see the moon, then that complicates things even further. Nobody can predict when that Rosh Chodesh is going to begin. But you are supposed to prepare for it, and you are supposed to be watching, and you're supposed to be witnessing when you see it. You're supposed to be, as a group, if you do see it, and you do hear if you do realize that that Rosh Chodesh has begun, you leave your work, you drop it, and you go and you observe a high Sabbath. And you rest and you spend family time. Chrissy has a family question. Kristen, you have a question? Your hand's up.
Hey, yeah, I have a question. Oops. So how does it always work out perfectly that the leap year or the leap month like just perfectly coincides enough to add up to 366 and a quarter days or whatever, if they do it that way? I guess it just does, right?
Jehovah made it work. And it worked for 1,000 years in the land of Israel. In fact, their calendar was better than the pagan calendar. I mean, the pagan calendar, even before the Julian calendar, was a mess. And then the Julian calendar is a mess. And then the Gregorian tried to come in and save it. And that one's, of course, much better. That's the one we observe today in the West. But I mean, every culture had its own calendar, right? Too. We had the Mayan calendar. We had the India one from India. We had the Chinese calendar. Yes. What can I do for you? Yes. Yes. Thank you. So that was an excellent question. But that just goes to show you the faith that the people would have. But wouldn't that be interesting if we're like, okay, guys, so on, Tishri 22 is going to be our meeting, and yet you don't know exactly when that's going to be, but that's how they did it. And it worked great. It worked fabulously. Maybe now's the right time to mention that thing that I wrote down. Why was the calendar changed? Why did the Jews end up changing the calendar? And it was the Jews, not the Hebrews per se, because remember, this is after the 10 tribes have left. So Judah is the only one left in the land, and of course Benjamin and some Levites and a few others. But for the most part, Judah's in charge. Why did they change? Well, because this. Let me see if I can find my notes on. Yes, here it is. Okay, because this is interesting to me. In 359 AD, the very last act of the Sanhedrin, before they were finally completely kicked off of the Temple Mount and never allowed to go back by Rome. And I think this is of note too, because in 359 AD is when Rome is starting to kind of just dissolve. And so it's interesting how Rome kicks the Sanhedrin off of the Temple Mount, Rome dissolves. Accident? I think not. But the Sanhedrin, their final act before they left the Temple Mount for good, was to get together a calendar that was going to work for all of Judah who were being dispersed by Rome throughout the Roman Empire, throughout Europe, all of Roman Empire. So what they did is they took a Babylonian calendar. They took the Babylonian calculations, of a really good Arab astronomer. And then they were exiled at that point. And so for its time, it was a really good calendar. But at this point, they're really, really, really off. I think I mentioned this before, and I've already mentioned on Voxer how many years are missing in there. Hundreds of years are missing in there as far as the true year that we are in on the Hebrew calendar. But that was the very last act that the Sanhedrin did. Obviously, because citing the new moon and checking the barley on the Mount of Olives for its being Aviv was no longer going to work, because there were going to be no more children of Israel living there, living in the land, the promised land. So that's what happened. Hang on one second. I'm reading something really fast. Okay. Right. Now, this is an interesting side note, you guys, in regards to this change. 2 days before Jesus Christ died, and you can find this in Matthew 23. Again, this is where understanding all this background really comes into play to understanding the New Testament. Here's just a quick little example of this. 2 days before he was to be crucified, remember he was crucified just before the Passover. He was being crucified as the Passover lambs were being sacrificed up on the Temple Mount. So this would have been what, Aviv 12, that he said to his people, he said, Baruch haba b'shem Yehovah. And he said, you will not see me again. And he's talking to the people. He's talking to the Jews up there on the top of the mountain. He says, you will not see me again until you say of me, Baruch haba b'shem Yehovah. Baruch haba b'shem Yehovah. Blessed is he who comes in the name of Jehovah. And at this point, he storms off the mount. And then this is, of course, the final straw. This is when the Pharisees immediately decide he's got to go, because he basically is proclaiming himself as the Messiah, the Mashiach. Christian. You got a question? Or did you not?
You already answered.
Okay. Do you know how to take your hand off?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll do that.
There you go. Perfect. Okay. Just making sure you didn't have another question there. Okay. So there's that. Yeah. All right. So the Kohen Gadol, I forgot, he also says, light the fires, sound the trumpet. So the shofar is blasted at the corner of the Temple Mount. The first fire is lit on the Mount of Olives, and all of the rest of that we already got there. Oh, here's what it says on that stone they found. It says the place of the trumpeting. That's what's etched in that stone that's still at the base of the Temple Mount on the exact same corner in which it would have been originally. Yes, excellent. All right, now where are we at? Yom Terua, Rosh Chodesh. We talked about all that. Okay, that's right. So we're back to Tishri.
Hey, super quick.
Yes.
So the Jews got dispersed by Rome all throughout the Roman Empire, like Europe, right?
Yes.
But you really
Northern
don't see it
Africa.
that clearly, right? Because they all still seem to be like hyper concentrated in Israel, right?
Okay. So good question. So they were dispersed throughout the Roman Empire, which was Europe, parts of Turkey, and all the way down to Northern Africa also. Because remember, we have our Sephardic Jews down there, okay? And we have our Ashkenazi Jews who are up in Northern Europe. So the Sephardic Jews are in the Northern Africa area and also in Spain. Okay, so you have two groups of Jews that we know of, main groups of Jews that we know of today that were dispersed. Now here's the deal. There were like hardly any Jews living in Israel. There were some, hardly any living there until the 20th century. You got to go back to World War I and World War II and the 6 Days War and all of that history if you want to understand how Israel has come back. But there has been an official call out of the Jewish people to return to the land of Israel. And the ones that are there right now are the ones who have heeded that call.
Oh, and you know, I guess, I mean, with Hitler killing so many, I guess there were a ton in France and he took them all. There were a ton in Poland and he took them there. You know what I mean? Like,
yes. And keeping in mind too, a lot of those people, the ones that got away, ran here to the States. And a lot of those did heed the call and have since moved to Israel. And obviously most of them have not yet.
slackers.
That's what the Israeli Jews would say. For sure. I think
Just
there's
kidding.
a lot of there.
Just kidding. If
There's
any Jewish people are watching, it's all good.
There's a lot of frustration there, though. Yeah, I can't say there's a blame them. I mean, if the prophet told us, right, to gather and come home, you know, I think we'd feel the same way. All right. So going back to month names. So where does Tishri come from? Okay. Because in the Old Testament, in Leviticus 23, I believe it's found in lots of different areas, in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and other places in the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, of the Old Testament, it says the 7th month, which literally is a literal translation of what they called the 7th month, 7th, right? So where does Tishri come from? Well, when Judah and Benjamin and Levi were taken over to Babylon in 608 BC-ish, right? It's like 587, whatever it is. When they were taken there and they resided in Babylon for 70 years, when they came back, they had renamed a lot of the months to correspond with Babylonian stuff. And in fact, Karen and Kristen, get this, one of their months is named Tammuz to this day. Yeah, Tammuz of all things. That's what I'm saying. Sometimes when I look at their current calendar, I'm just like, oh, wow. So we're not the only ones who have a lot of Nimrod stuff threaded throughout our culture. So anyway, so it says on the first day of the 7th month is when Israel needed to observe this day that Moses, or that the children of Israel heard the commandments shouted down from the top of the inferno on top of Mount Sinai, and that they had agreed to follow these commandments. Now we're going to keep going with the narration of the story. Okay, we're going to go a little bit forward here, a little bit more. So Moses is told, he's given instructions at the top of the mountain. Remember, we're back where the children of Israel said, we don't want to talk to Jehovah anymore. He's scary. You do it. The Lord says, fine, but they have to shema you as the prophet. And they say, whatever it takes, whatever. So then Jehovah gives Moses a set of very, very specific instructions. And here's where the archaeological finds at the base of the Sinai in Saudi Arabia come into play. He is to go down the mountain and he is to kill, I don't want to tell you the wrong animal. I believe there were multiple different kinds of animals. Let me tell you what they were. Okay, so he tells them never to forget this day. I already talked about that. So on the first day of the 7th month, we talked about what a Rosh Chodesh is. Oh, side note. Talking about Yeshua, Jesus Christ, Yeshua Mashiach, and talking about the New Testament, how we can really understand it. All the miracles that are mentioned, and I mentioned this on Voxer already, but all of the miracles mentioned in the New Testament have to do with Yeshua breaking the Takanot, breaking the man-made instructions that the rabbis had instituted before he was born. Every single one. And there was a miracle that accompanied that breaking of the Takanot, that broke that extra rule that had been created in the seat of Moses in the synagogues. There was a miracle that went along with it as like a heavenly testimony that this is sanctioned by God. This breaking of the Takanot is sanctioned by God because, of course, when a takanot was made, when a commandment was tweaked, when it was added to or diminished, because the rabbi was sitting in the seat of Moses, a stone seat. You can still see the main one. Just look up seat of Moses and you'll find it. So when a rabbi was sitting in the seat of Moses, they said that the takanot, that the Almighty was obligated to obey the takanot. Yikes. So it makes sense that when Yeshua came, that part of his mission and ministry was to break the takanot. He would break all of the extra rules. And I've already talked about in Voxer how Yeshua had used the special ritual stone jars to change the water to wine. Those stone jars were set apart and consecrated for water only, to be used in the cleansing rituals that, of course, the Pharisees had added to, all the stuff. And so what did Yeshua do? He could have used I've already said, he could have used the empty jars that the wine came out of. That's not what he used. He purposely used these sanctified, holy things. He took those stone jars and put wine in it. I mean, sassy. And that was the very first miracle that we're told of in the New Testament. So yeah, go through it. Every single miracle that is counted in the New Testament, there's a takanot that had been broken in some way in there. All right. So obviously these commandments were to be taken very seriously, and they were never to be added to or diminished by man. So that's why the Pharisees or the rabbis would sit in the seat of Moses to do it, because Moses, as the living prophet, was the only person with the authority to change, to add to, or to diminish the commandments that were given to the people. And so sitting in the seat of Moses, they would become as Moses, and therefore they could say or do whatever they wanted to do to add to or to diminish to the Torah, to the law, to the instructions. They were not to be doing that. That was told Moses on this day. He was told, nobody is to add to or to diminish my commandments. Okay, so then for the next 3 chapters, Moses is given instructions, and this is what he's supposed to do. So they are supposed to, do I have the animals? Here we go. Bulls. Was it just bulls? Maybe it was just bulls.
Hey, Emily.
Yeah.
Question. So, how do you answer someone who says, see, God said we can't add to or diminish his commandments. Look how much trouble they got in the New Testament for that. But, I don't know if they got in trouble, but they, we have new information and new commandments we've learned about since then. So where is it justified to add to it in other contexts?
Good question. What did the rabbis sit in to change to make the takanot? Do you remember?
The mercy seat? No.
Definitely not. That's the Ark of the Covenant. It was the seat of Moses. So what they were saying is, as I'm sitting in the stone seat, I am as Moses, because the living prophet has the authority to give new instructions.
Sorry, that was my daughter. Yeah.
So you can see the importance of having a living prophet. Does that answer your question?
Totally. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That was the importance of having a living prophet being restored on the earth. You've got to have somebody who communes with God, and that the people who make covenants with Jehovah, we covenant to Shema, his prophet. And in fact, also at the same time, during the series of instructions Moses is getting up there, remember, Jehovah says to him, there's going to come a prophet later whom Israel must shema. They must hear and obey him. Of course, speaking of Yeshua himself when he's going to come in the flesh. So hopefully that answers your question. We good?
Totally good. Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Because I know people bring that up, and I wanted to be ready to be right, this is how that works.
Yeah, it doesn't work for just some dude who's standing in a church and saying, you know what, baptism's cool. I guess we'll keep doing that, but we're not going to do this. You know, that's not what we're talking about here. I get that could be considered a taka note. So yes, it must be from a living prophet. Okay, excellent question. I'm glad you asked that, just to make sure I had that very clear. So now, yes, he's told to kill bulls, several bulls. That's it. Okay, so he's told to kill several bulls. And he writes down, Moses writes on a scroll of sheep hides. He writes down the commandments that were shouted down, and he writes down all the instructions he was given in those 3 chapters in Leviticus. Okay, so he writes them down. And then he tells the Levites, remember that they were the ones in charge. They were the tribe in charge of the temple ceremonies and the sacrifices and offerings and such. So he tells the Levites to kill several bulls, and how much blood is in each bull? This is a lot of blood. You're talking about buckets and buckets and buckets of blood, right? So they do. And I have it written down here that the Torah scroll itself takes 55 hides. That's just a side note, 55 sheep hides. So for 3 chapters of that, I don't think it would have taken very many sheep. So anyway, he writes down the instructions on the sheep hide. He rolls it up into a scroll. They kill the few bulls, and they gather the blood of the bulls. So then at this point, the Levites, under his instructions, under Jehovah's instructions, they take half of the blood and they sprinkle the blood on the altar. I've seen sometimes where people do this sort of that's not sprinkling. From what I understand, it was this motion. Sprinkling was this motion. So I don't know how many of them it took, how long to sprinkle half of that blood on the altar, but they did. Again, you can see that altar if you go and you look up, gosh, what is the modern day name of where the real Mount Sinai is? It'll come to me. Anyway, so you can look up this very altar it's talking about, and you can see the corrals. Like I said before, you can see the corrals that were built next to the altar that would bring the animals up and keep them calm before they were sacrificed. But they would sprinkle half of it on the altar. Then the other half was put in a bowl, bucket, whatever. And Moses took a hyssop. From what I understand, that is basically a branch, tree branch, right? Let me look that up because I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. Hyssop, what is it? All right. Oh, it's not a tree branch. My teacher all those years ago was wrong. This is hyssop. Let me show you. If the translation is correct, and it's not a tree branch, because there's always that too, but this is hyssop. Okay, so he took a bunch of that, or the tree branch, depending on the translation. I'd have to look into that. Does it really matter? Probably not. But he took a plant, anyway, a dried plant, and he sticks it in the bowl, and he goes and he sprinkles it. He shakes it on every single Israelite there, okay? So we know that at this point, there's well over 1,000. I believe when they're counted, because they are all counted at this point, and aren't there 600 something men, like of warrior age? Anyway, if you do the math, there's a whole bunch of them. So men, women, children, everybody. So everybody gets sprinkled with this blood. Guys, this is so important. Asterisk this, underline this. This is the pivotal moment in the history of the world, okay? Aside from Eden and aside from Gethsemane, this is the pivotal moment of the world, okay? He takes the hyssop, he sprinkles it on everyone. He takes the time to sprinkle it on everybody. Everybody gets sprinkled. He sprinkles it on the scroll that he had written that is on the altar, okay? When he's done, he sprinkles it on the scroll, or what the scriptures, the English translation calls a book. It's a scroll. And now This is called the blood covenant. If we don't understand the blood covenant, we do not understand the fall feasts. We do not understand Jehovah's mission. We understand nothing. This is it. The blood covenant has been made. Israel has covenanted that they are going to Shema Moses and Shema Yehovah. They're going to keep his commandments. And in return, they are going to become that nation of kings and priests that was promised to Abraham. They're also going to become the Segula. And we talked about this in your vocabulary words. The Segula is the Hebrew word for a peculiar treasure, is the way it's translated in English, because there's not really a way of saying it. What it means is it is a treasure that is so precious to the king that he holds it in his own hand. No one is allowed to touch it. No one is allowed to care for it. He entrusts nobody with his treasure. It is his. It is his own segula. So at this point is renewed the covenant to Abraham, okay? That if Abraham's children follow Yehovah, then they become the Lord's segula, and they are becoming the kings and priests of the world to go out and to preach to all the nations of the world. If you go back to Genesis 10, when the kingdoms were divided after the fall of Babylon, after Nimrod loses his world dominion, there are 70 nations. And Jehovah said, you know what, Satan, go ahead, take 70 nations, be in charge, make your own religion, whatever. I'm going to keep one. One is going to be mine, and you watch and see what I do with this one. You just watch. So this one nation is supposed to be set apart to become kings and priests and to become the teachers, the saviors of the rest of the nations, and to put everybody else back on track. So that is the blood covenant. Now, why blood? Why is that necessary? Because the whole point of the blood covenant is this. If one of the two parties breaks the blood covenant, they are under the death penalty. If you break the blood covenant, the guilty party must die. And you will be as dead as that bull whose blood you were sprinkled with. So, if Jehovah breaks the covenant, he dies. If Israel breaks the covenant, they die. There's absolutely no way out. This is a blood covenant. You do not break a blood covenant. This all happens on that Shavuot, okay? This is all the stuff they're supposed to remember later on the first day of the seventh month. However, what happens? Moses goes back up. He's gone for 40 days and 40 nights. Yes, it's literal. He is gone for 40 days and 40 nights, and he's given instructions on how to build the Ark of the Covenant, on the table of showbread, the tabernacle. He's given all the dimensions. All this good stuff is given to him, okay? At the very end of this 40 days, Jehovah says to him, guess what? You better head down there because nothing's good going on. In the meantime, the day before Moses comes back down the mountain, so on the 39th day, the people, of course, are saying, Moses is gone, he's dead, whatever. We want to go back and worship our own Egyptian bulls, our own Egyptian cows, Hathor and the Apis bull. That's what we want. And Aaron says, tomorrow we'll have a feast for Jehovah, pagan style. Now, what does the first commandment, by the way, say? If you read it in the Hebrew, it says, thou shalt have no other gods in my face. It's not this nice little before me. It's in my face. You're not going to worship other gods in their way and then say, it's for me. You don't do that. So he has already shouted this down from the mount, okay? And so Aaron comes up with this brilliant idea. I know. let's make everybody happy. And let's go ahead and throw us a pagan festival. I'll make myself a golden calf, because I'm sure that's what he did as a profession in Egypt, right? He was probably a smelter, and he probably smelted plenty of idols in his day, which is why the people were coming to him, right? And so he's like, but then we'll say we're doing it in the name of Jehovah. Jehovah is not a seen God, guys. He does not have, at this point, he does not have a likeness. He is the invisible, unseen God. Only his prophets, and hardly any of those had ever seen him, right? So that's what they're going to do. So Jehovah on the last day says to Moses, you better get down there, man, because it's not good what they're doing. Oh, and at this time, of course, we know that when Moses was up there, Jehovah had, with his own finger, etched out the commandments, the 10 commandments, in the stone tablets, and he gave them to Moses. Moses can see from up there, again, if you look on the satellite, you do a little bit of research of this location, he can see everything laid out down there. He can hear it. He can hear the party starting. So he runs down from the mountain. He's got these stone tablets, and what does he do? Do you guys remember what he does with the tablets? Bam!
He breaks them.
He breaks them. Exactly. He destroys these tablets, and he said, you have broken the blood covenant. Now I'm going to ask for a little interaction. What's the penalty? Anybody?
You die.
Death.
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 You is supposed to die. You do not break the blood covenant. What are you doing? And so Moses is beside himself. Think of everything he's been through. These people have put him through so much. And now they're all going to get, every single one of them is going to get killed. They're all going to die. And the Lord says, out of the way, Moses. I'm going to strike them all dead. They're all going down. Get out of the way. We're done. They have earned it. They brought this upon themselves. They can't even handle 40 days to follow the commandment. They can't even handle 40 days without you to make sure that they shema me. Moses begs. He goes back up in the mountain and he says, no, please. And he says, because the Lord said, I'm going to kill them all and I'm going to start all over with just you. Just like I did with Noah. I did it before. I'll do it again. And Moses says, no, please don't do this. Please, we've been through too much. Please. Is there anything we can do? You know what he says? Moses says, I didn't break it. I didn't break the covenant. Kill me instead. Don't kill Israel. Start over with somebody else being a prophet. And Jehovah says, no, I'm not doing that. But I will tell you what I will do. Do you guys have any guesses to what this deal, how this deal was made?
I just want to say it reminds me, right, of Jacob 5 when the Lord's going to burn the vineyard and the servant is like, wait, can we do one more try?
Yes, it is true, right? There are a couple, I think there are even a couple more if we sat and thought about it too, right? I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Abraham was like, no. Yeah, there are times where the prophet's like, no, don't do it. Yes, excellent observation. So remember, I'm going to go back.
They're like types of Christ in like being, going to bat for their people, being an advocate for their people.
I love that. You're absolutely right, Kristen. I love that.
They're sinful people.
Yes, they're sinful, whining, unfaithful people, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know, it's so funny because people, I feel like people read the Old Testament. They're like, oh, well, they were idiots. Why would they do that? And you look around now and you're like, well, I don't think we're any better, different situations, same problems. So yeah,
and I see them and I'm like, we do the same things all.
We do the same things.
And my biggest thing is like, it's so easy to be like, they're so stupid. Like they saw a dang sea parted and walked through it. But it just shows, like you said, like this idea of an unseen God, we all like to see and then believe, but these are examples of how it doesn't work that way.
Well, and you're right.
Believe first, and that's true faith. Seeing is not faith.
Yes.
It's not believing.
Yes, exactly. And also, Karen, if you go back to their example, we think they're idiots because we don't bow down at a calf at an Apis bull and Hathor and do our thing.
We do
But-
pretty similar stuff.
But you know what? The prophet says, quit listening to crappy music.
We bow down to, yeah,
I have such a hard time.
Lady Gaga. I don't, whoever, you know.
But even like music from my day that I love, I currently am out of touch. I don't listen to modern music, but even stuff I know in the back of my head, I'm singing along the lyrics. I'm like, this song kind of sucks. Like, this is a terrible message. What am I doing? But the rhythm's really good. Like, there's no difference between me and that person bowing down at that calf. You know, I mean, it's Babylon. Babylon is the dominant popular culture of the time. So yeah, I think it is important. That's, and we've talked about this. Karen, Kristen, and I have talked about this. Like going through your home and being like, what are my golden calves? What have I got sitting around here that I've been commanded to eschew? I have been told to cross away out of Babylon, cross over the river, and leave it behind. We're no different, you guys. So Moses says,
And we still have more work to do.
I still have work to do. I've done some. I've got a good start on it, but I still have a lot of work to do as far as leaving Babylon behind. It's hard. It's really, really hard, especially when you have people mocking you, right? You know, we all talk about this sometimes on Facebook. One of us will be like, yeah, for me, I left Nimrod Santa behind. You know, I don't do Santa anymore. You know, I'm sure it was the same thing for maybe those who hesitated to bow down at the golden calf. I'm sure that they were mocked and made fun of and pressured and shamed and all the rest of that. You know, I'm sure that there was that going on. You know that there were people shamed into that. There had to have been people who knew that that was not right, and they still did it.
Yeah, that's what I've wondered. I'm like, gosh, was there not one of them that's like, what are y'all doing?
I'm sure that there were. Yes, but if you remember about the mark of the beast on the forehead and the hand, and the Hebrew thinking, that means people who are convinced that it's right, but people who also feel forced to do it, right? It's the same thing, or coerced or whatever. People who know that they're not doing right, but they do it anyway because they go along with whatever the popular culture says, whatever, or even friends and family who should know better what they say, you know? Yeah, I'm with you, Karen. I'm sure somebody was like, are you sure this is a good idea? You know, like somebody had to have done that. So Moses says, please, 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 I'm an old fart. I'm 80 years old. You know, I've been through so much. Please don't do this. Figure something else out. So Jehovah does. And this is what he figures out. He puts into place a system that shows that there is a death penalty to be paid. And this system becomes the system of sacrifice, what we call in English sacrifice, but that's not the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is, I'll get back to you on that one. And I should have put that in my words. But what it means is offering. So rather than a sacrifice, it's a system of offerings. And the Hebrew word for offering, the one I can't remember, what it means is to draw closer to Jehovah, to God. It's to bring yourself closer to God, your offerings. And so with this comes a lot of blood. With this offering system comes a lot of offerings, parentheses, sacrifice, of animals. Okay? So what he said was, I'm going to give you a set of very specific instructions, and there are five different offerings that Israel was to do. 2 of them are mandatory, they're obligatory, they have to be done. Those are sin offerings, and I can't remember the other one. And then the 3 of the other ones are voluntary, and those ones are the peace offering. I don't remember. You guys can find this in the very first books of Leviticus. I'm going to do a video on those, so I will be able to go through those if anyone's interested on that. But you don't need to worry about that right now. The important point is that it was a sacrificial system. When we come to the fall feast of Yom Kippur, we're really going to get into the offerings and sacrifices at that point. So Jehovah says, I'm going to institute a system of offerings where you must you must perform these 2 obligatory offerings every year. One is on Yom Kippur. And I can't remember when the other one was. Again, we'll go through that again. But basically what it was, Yom Kippur means Day of Atonement. So he says, every year Israel needs to do this sacrifice on Yom Kippur, which is what, Tishri 14, I believe. Don't quote me on that. I think it is. I have it in a million different places. It's either 14 or 15. And he says, you are going to, as a nation, you need to repent. And you need to remember that you are under obligation of having the death penalty on your whole nation. And so I'll tell you what I'm going to do. You are going to have to perform this sacrifice every year until the death penalty is paid. Now, remember, let's go back to what the blood covenant means. It means that the guilty party pays the death penalty. There's only one glimmer of hope. What that is if the innocent party of the 2, if the innocent party agrees to be killed to receive the death penalty in the place of the guilty party, that will pay the penalty. The penalty cannot be paid by anybody related to the guilty party, and it cannot be paid by anybody that was not sprinkled or of the people that were sprinkled with the hyssop and the bull's blood. It must be paid by the other party who was an innocent person in that covenant, who did not break the covenant. If that person, the innocent party, I'm going to say it one more time, this is so important, you guys. This is that thing I was talking about, asterisk, underline. The only individual in the universe that could make up for this blood covenant having been broken, the only party who could fix this would be the innocent side. And who made that covenant with Moshe? You can go ahead.
Jehovah.
Who?
Jehovah.
Jehovah was the only person legally able to pay this death penalty. Are there any?
So you've taught this to me before. I'm getting it again. So like, the atonement covers sin in that same way, but this is the thing where the nation of Israel has their own Day of Atonement for this specific violation that had to also be covered.
Yes.
Oh, it finally clicked for me.
Okay. So
and
when
they call it the Day of Atonement, right?
Yom Kippur. Yes. So you're absolutely correct. So when Mashiach, when the Messiah came the first time, and he went through the atonement of Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, what he did there is he paid for the individual person to be able to repent. However, obviously, Israel as a nation would not receive forgiveness or receive that repentance yet at that point. As a nation, the nation of Israel could not be redeemed. That is going to happen in the fall feast of Yom Kippur.
So it seems like if you said that to someone, they'd be like, no, that's not true, because it's the infinite atonement and it's for all things. I mean, how would you explain
an individual person?
Infinite atonement, wouldn't that cover nations? Anyway, I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, sure. No, it covers individuals. So if you are if you're an individual of descent, let's say you have the bloodline of Israel and you're under that death penalty, you're forgiven on an individual basis, given the atonement of Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. However, the nation of Judah will not, or Israel at large, will not receive its redemption until Yom Kippur is fulfilled in the fall feast, in this time period of the second coming of the Lord. And we'll talk about exactly when that's going to be as far as the Revelation timeline that we've already discussed. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Because you think about what has Israel been through since this happened.
Oh, it wasn't covered in the atonement completely. It's the second coming.
As a nation, yes. On an individual basis, it's already been covered. You know, if they repent and they do this and that, they're good. As a nation, they will not become the Lord's people again. They will not become the nation that they were set up to be until the Day of Atonement. Judah in particular will not receive.
But with the caveat, an individual can become the Lord's people individually, one by one, instead of just lumping everybody together. Okay. Gotcha.
That's exactly what that is. Yes. And so I'll get into that in a little bit too, about what that looks like. All right. So any other questions about that? No. Okay. Actually, you know what? I'll get into that when we do Yom Kippur. We'll get into that more in Yom Kippur. Okay. Because the mercy seat comes into play with this. All right. And the revealing of the Ark of the Covenant. That all has to do with the redemption of Israel.
And this is why Israel has had a pretty rough deal in many eras, right?
Correct. Yes. And also because they, like us, have not followed the instructions. Remember, they were supposed to give the land its Shemitah. Remember? They were supposed to give the land its rest every 7th year. They were supposed to have a land rest. They never did. They went through 490 years in the land of Israel without ever observing the Shemitah. And so they were taken to Babylon, and the land got its Shemitah. The land got this 70 years of rest that they owed it. You know, so the Lord does, he gets what, you know, what he exacts from his people. He will get it, period. Okay. Any other questions as far as that subject? No? Good to go. Okay. All right. Excellent questions. So Moses goes, let's see. So comes down, the blood covenant is broken. That's right. So Jehovah says he is going to have to do it himself. Basically, he's going to have to pay that death penalty himself, being the only innocent party in that blood covenant. And so at this point, in order to become the nation of kings and priests and the nation of Segula, the Jehovah's Segula, they were going to have to be reconciled back to Jehovah on a yearly basis on Yom Kippur. So again, we'll go through that in depth when we do the next feast is going to be Yom Kippur. So that system, of course, included the blood of bulls, goats, lambs, rams, and also birds on occasion if you were a poor person. And we've talked about that too. But here's the thing though, is that Israel was not just to kill an animal and expect that they're good, right? That was never the point. The point was that they had faith. They had to have faith. They had to understand the shadow picture of this offering. They had to understand the shadow picture of the lamb, the shadow picture of the bull, what the significance was, why it was so important, why that death was necessary, and what it would cover. But also keep in mind, because a lot of people say, that's a lot of death. That's weird. Remember, the Levites did not have their own property as far as to live on. They did have some to raise cattle and other things, but they did not have their own little parceled out land like all of the other tribes had in Israel. They were dispersed throughout all of the tribes because they were the ones set up to teach the Torah, teach God's word. And so when you would offer your sacrifices and such, that's how you would feed the priests and their families. That's how you would feed Levi. So this whole thing was a beautiful picture set up basically to have Israel in symbiance with not only Jehovah, but also in order to care for the priests who were not able to cultivate and become prosperous in a worldly way, the way that the other tribes were able to do. All right. Let me see if there's anything else on this little thing I've got over here.
But
Okay.
we're going to understand better later why it's the second coming that does that for them when we
Yes.
discuss later.
Yes, because what's going to happen is it's going to be a renewal with the land of with the people of Israel. There's going to be a renewal of the covenant, and that is what Yom Kippur is about. There's going to be a renewal of that covenant because, again, if you look around you, where are the tribes? The renewal of the blood covenant has not yet come about as a nation.
So what if somebody said to you, like, why is that fair when it was the Israelites thousands of years ago that violated it, and now here we are with newborn babies that still have to pay for it?
Well, they don't have to pay for it. Maybe I don't understand the question.
Just like other like generations ever after suffered so much as a result of what the Israelites did. And I know that comes up in other scriptures too, like where the Lord, like the consequences fall on other generations, you know, but like,
Yeah,
how would you answer someone who's like, why is that fair for innocent people to have to deal with the covenant broken by their ancestors?
I can answer that. The answer is because Jehovah is so merciful. And that you may be like, eh? But that is it. And I will tell you why. So if you recall on Boxer, I told you guys the significance of that tiny little verse that's found in Leviticus 23 that is between the fall feasts or the spring feasts and the fall feasts, right? You guys remember that, right? The first 22 or so verses talk about all of the spring feasts, and it goes in line. And then there's that wonky verse. It seems like it's so out of place, and it's about the harvest, and it's about how Israel is to, when they harvest their fields, they are to do it and round the corners, and so that they leave the triangles of the corners of fields so that there's still grain growing here. And also that they're not to glean their own fields. They're not to go back after they use their sickles and they harvest. They're not to go back and pick up the grain off of the ground, or to leave everything there for the Gentiles. They're to leave them there for the stranger. Remember, the stranger translates basically to a Gentile, okay? Someone who's not within the covenant, the Abrahamic covenant. The reason why this is there, the reason why this is between the spring feasts and the fall feasts, is because this is so pivotal, you guys. This is the story of Ruth. Ruth is the initiatory phase of this shadow picture. Ruth, remember that she was of Moab. She came from Moab. And I hate repeating myself, you guys. I'm sorry if you guys remember this, you know all this, but I'll just go through it just in case somebody didn't get to it or you don't understand. But basically, Moab is one of the two grandsons of Lot who were conceived through his daughters. So this happened at the end of Sodom and Gomorrah. They were concerned not that there were no other humans left on the planet. They were concerned that their father lost all of his sons in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and therefore their father would no longer have a bloodline on the earth. That's what they were saying in Hebrew. It doesn't say they thought they were the only people left on the planet like it does in English. So basically, she came from a very interesting background. These people of Moab, the Moabites, they also they worship the god of Chemosh, and this god is one of child sacrifice. Almost all of them did it, whether it's Moloch or whatever you want to call it, Baphomet. They all sacrificed their children. These pagan people sacrificed children. They were disgusting. She came from this line, and yet when Ruth's husband died, Naomi's son, and Naomi's other son died, the husband of Orpah, and her own husband died in the land of Moab, Naomi was like, forget this. I'm going back to take my chances near Judah. And we know that she's of the tribe of Judah because, of course, well, that'll come out later. But I'm going back to my tribe. I'm going back to Judah. Forget this. I'm going to take my chances over there, even though I don't have a male member of my family who is who is alive. I don't care. I will be an outcast. Because you were basically a social pariah there if you were a woman and you didn't have a male husband or heir to help keep you within society. And so she was like, I don't even care. I'll be a beggar, whatever. So she went back to Judah, and of course, Ruth refused to leave her, and she stayed with her. And then Ruth would go, and per these instructions in Leviticus 23, she would go and she would glean the fields, and she would pick up the fields. Boaz ends up seeing her doing this, and she intrigues him because she's a Moabite. What's she doing over here? Sort of a thing. And he looks into it. Turns out he learns her story and how she basically wants to become grafted into the family of Abraham. And she won't leave Naomi, and she wants to call Naomi's God her God, and he becomes intrigued. And so then at this point, she gleans the field, and Boaz gives instructions to his reapers to basically leave huge chunks of grain for her. Just leave the whole thing. Just leave it there. Don't harvest the entire field. Let her gather it up. And so she does. And I really want to go over Ruth really in depth into this, because there's so much, you guys, in this initiatory layer, including the threshing floor, where she goes to appeal to Boaz, the person who was supposed to marry Ruth, who refused, all of that. But we'll get into that in another time. But basically, we are Ruth. And we are told in the New Testament that at the time Christ's ministry ended officially to the Jews, it ended on Shavuot, right after he died, 50 days from Yom HaBikurim, okay? That day that he took the first fruits, the people who were resurrected with him at the same time he was, the day he took them up to the Father and presented them to the Father, Yom HaBikurim, okay, 50 days after, on Shavuot, the day of the Pentecost, when he instructed Israel, okay, no more messing around. Go out, do your job, be the kings and priests that you're supposed to be, and go out and spread the word, which they did. That was the primitive church, right? And so they go out and they are trying to gather in from the wild branches that we're told about in the scriptures, especially Jacob 5, right? And the wild branches. And what does that represent? It represents us. It represents the Gentiles of the other 70 nations that were not of Shem. And so you go through and you realize when you're reading this, okay, why is that one little scripture in Leviticus 23, I believe it's 22, that verse, why is that there? What is that? It's because we are root. If Israel, and especially Judah, since they were the only ones left in the land, if they had never had a blindness put upon them, because it is even said in the scriptures that they're partially blinded by Jehovah. And if they had never become blinded, we would never be able to glean in the field. At that day of Shavuot began what is known as the age of the Gentiles. This was the time set aside in the harvest to allow the stranger to come to the field and pick up the tiny little kernels that are left in the field. Haven't you guys ever wondered what it was like to read the brass plates? Or to read the original scrolls that Moses wrote? I mean, that's what Israel had. We never had that. We have little tiny bits and pieces that have fallen to the ground that we're picking up. One of the beautiful things about the restoration, of course, is that we're given some really nice kernels. But when the prophet says that the church has not received its full restoration, he knows what he's talking about, obviously, right? He's the prophet. But we have just little bits and pieces right now. And we're getting more and more and more. But the church will not have its full glory until this covenant is renewed with Israel. When the blood covenant is renewed with Israel, that is when the church is going to come into its full glory. Now, to get into that in just a second, hang on, let me write this down because I don't want to forget. Okay, so going back, really quickly. So we're also told in the New Testament and all over in the Doctrine and Covenants, by the way, that the age of the Gentiles is going to come to a close. It's going to end. Judah's scales of blindness on their eyes will fall, and they will see clearly for the first time. And this was their blindness and their persecutions and all their trials and things that they have been through was partially put there as a blessing to the 70 nations to give us a chance to be able to glean the fields that they were able to harvest. So there is the huge long answer to your question, Kristen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Okay. Any other questions regarding that? Anybody? I need to plug in my computer really fast.
When is the age of the Gentile ending? I ask this because over the past couple years, probably since the eclipse, actually 3 years, a lot of people have been saying like that and other things. We've come to the end of the day of the Gentile, and I think there's a belief that has ended, but it has it. And how do we know when that's ended?
It's wrapping up, but it's not ended. And I'll tell you when you'll know it's ended is when the renewal of the blood covenant has been made regarding the mercy seat. And I'm glad you asked it because that gives me a perfect segue into what I just wrote down that I didn't want to forget.
You're welcome.
Yes. So we're going to go through this again with Yom Kippur. But just to give you a little preview, again, we go to Ron Wyatt, right? According to him, he says he knows where the Ark of the Covenant is. Also, he says that the Ark of the Covenant was what? It was anointed with the blood of Jesus Christ on if you're sitting on the Ark, on the right side of the Ark sits a pool of his dried blood. And if you guys are curious about that, you can look that up. The reason why I believe it is because that fulfills the shadow picture of Yom Kippur. And so we'll get into that with Yom Kippur. When do you know that the age of the Gentiles is over? It is when the blindness of the Jews is taken. It is when the Ark of the Covenant is revealed to the world in a miraculous way, and that the Jews see that the mercy seat was anointed with the blood of their Mashiach. And that will be done publicly. It's going to be a miraculous thing that the whole world is going to be aware of, which is pivotal for the Antichrist, right? Because we know the Antichrist is going to sit on it for the last 3.5 years of the trials and tribulation. He's going to sit on it during what's known as the Great Tribulation. He can't sit on the mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant if it's not found by then. So does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, cool. Any other questions? Okay. And again, we're gonna go really in depth into Yom Kippur, just like we're doing with Yom Terua. Yom Terua is the most complicated by far because there's so many layers and different things that go into this. So then moving on, so we've passed the blood covenant being broken, the plan to fix the blood covenant. Moses goes back up. He gets the instructions. When he goes back up again to the mount, he gets another 40 days. He gets the instructions for this new system of sacrifice or offerings. That's what he gets next out of that. Because remember, originally they didn't need that, but now they're under the death penalty. Now they have to have it. So now he's getting all the instructions for that. He comes down and he shares it with the people. And they obviously agree to do this. Now, thus ends the initiatory phase. Now, you guys already know the intermediary phase, but to go over it really quickly, what happens is on the first day of the 7th month, I don't need to explain Rosh Chodesh to you or any of that, okay? At the sighting of the moon, the new moon, or the next moon, I should say, on the first of what they call now Tishri 1, the 7th month, then they send the witnesses, they go up, they testify, it's confirmed, thus begins the high Sabbath. And it's interesting because the Lord knows that people like to party. All the feasts are parties, all of them. You're supposed to party and have a good time. That's what you're supposed to do. And so part of the Sabbaths, you're supposed to have a party. You're supposed to gather with your friends and family. You're supposed to discuss the gospel, what you learned in the scriptures that week. For the high Sabbath, you're supposed to gather together, friends and family. You're supposed to eat good food that was, remember, mostly prepared before that day. You're supposed to be wearing your clean garments. You're supposed to have mikvah yourself. You're supposed to have a great time. That's what you're supposed to do. And so on Yom Terua, they would blow the shofars. They would light the fires like they would do every month. But this one was different because it was a feast. And so this one was considered the most special. It's also one of the most enigmatical. A lot of people say, we don't understand why they even had to have this. It's because they don't understand it plugs into the revelation, okay? A lot of things that are going to happen on Yom Terua. Now remember, with that, yeah, go ahead. So remember, what?
Sorry, maybe you're going to explain this. You said a lot of things that need to happen on Yom Terua.
Yes.
So I know that the day of the Lord's coming and the resurrection, the beginning of the 10 days of awe is the fulfillment.
Yeah.
But you're saying the previous Yom Teruas are going to be rehearsals of that and big things are going to happen. Okay. I'm just checking.
Yes.
Okay.
There will be. So because, layers, right? Layers and layers and layers. And so that's where I'm at right now, is the intermediary section. So obviously the ancient intermediary fulfillment had to end when they had to leave the Temple Mount, although that's been picked up again, right? We already went through that. That's being done again every year. But now, what do they call Yom Terua? Do you remember?
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah, yes. Now they call it Rosh Hashanah, the head of the new year, because at some point the rabbis had changed Yom Terua to Rosh Hashanah to celebrate the new year along with the pagans. The pagan new year began in the fall. And so they wanted to be hip with Babylon, and that's what they did. And then eventually the real Rosh Hashanah in Aviv 1 in March, April, that one was completely dropped as the new year. So now on the rabbinical calendar, you will find that Yom Terua is no longer, it doesn't even exist. And it's like the most important of all the feasts.
Question.
Especially in our day. And it's not even marked on their calendar anywhere.
So you said they did that so that they could match up with the pagan new year.
Yes.
And we're on a pagan calendar, then why do we celebrate our new year in January?
Okay, so that began with the Romans.
So it's just different pagans.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Because January is for the god Januos, and he was the two-faced god of new beginnings,
Okay.
God of foresight and afterthought and whatever else, pagan garbage, whatever. But that's a good question. So at the time, what was considered the Babylon at the time, it was the new year was at that time in fall. And so at that time, the rabbis had the two New Years. They celebrated two of them. They celebrated the real Rosh Hashanah in March, April, what we call March, April, and they also celebrated it in Yom Terua to go along with the pagans, to be hip cats that fit in with the culture, right? And then eventually what I'm saying is that this one, the real one, was dropped. So now they don't you can't find it anywhere. So for example, on my calendar, I always circle Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah, bold, because I'm like, oh, if anything's going to happen, that's the day, And then on mine, I actually white it out and then I write Yom Terua because It's the Feast of Trumpets. That's what it's supposed to be. So on Yom Terua, I forgot this. So during the intermediary phase, the people would come out and they would blow shofars. Everybody would come out with a shofar and they would blow the horn at the sighting of the new moon, and everybody would shout. They would shout in joy. They'd shout in kind of what we do with our New Year's today. That's what they would do. So they would come out shouting. They would come out laughing, giggling, talking, you know, all the rest of that good stuff, blow the horn, have a great feast. And that is how you observe Yom Terua. So that was how they went about that, intermediary layer.
Julie, do you have a question? Did you mean to raise your hand?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Hello?
Did you say yes?
Sorry, yeah, I just had to get my stuff off of mute. So can you hear me? Because I'm traveling and I don't have great reception, so I'm not sure if I'm coming through okay.
Yep, I can hear you great.
Okay, so I went through a dead spot. I lost you guys for about 10 minutes. So I know you're well past this question, but I still want to
Go ahead, shoot.
ask. Right when my call dropped, you were talking about Ron Wyatt and the blood of the Savior on the right side of the mercy seat.
Yes.
So years ago, I watched this YouTube video, and it was from Ron Wyatt, and he talked about discovering what he believed was where the cross was, the crucifixion cross, and the blood of the Savior had gone down through a crack. And
Yes.
he felt like he found the blood of the Savior. Is that the video that you were referring to, or is there a different one?
There are several of them, but that incident is exactly what I'm talking about. And we can have Karen put some some links too down below. I can help her dig those up.
I'll add the link. And that link, I also put that exact link in our previous video that I uploaded about the timeline.
So my question was that when I watched that movie, the video, and then a couple of years later, I was reminded about it, and I tried to Google it or find it again, and it had been removed.
Oh yeah.
So is it back on now?
No, not that one. They're constantly having to put up new ones, babe. I know exactly what you're talking. Karen had the same problem, by the way. I sent her one. When was that, Karen? Last year? And
yeah.
Off.
They removed it, but there is another one that I put in my last video.
So are these just copies of the original, or are they different ones talking about the same thing? Do you know?
They're different ones talking about the same thing, because people are constantly trying to keep the information out there, but it's always being taken down.
I see. Okay. Because he had that blood tested, right? And the people who tested it were like, there's not the right number of chromosomes here, or something like that. Is my memory serving
Yes.
me right?
Yes, absolutely. Because he only had the half chromosomes from his mother and the one Y chromosome.
Right.
But that test.
So you found another video with that information on it.
There are several of them. Yeah.
Okay. That's awesome, because I was like, that's gone. I wanted to watch that again, and I wanted to share it with people. And at the time, I couldn't find anything. It was because it was, it vanished.
Yeah, I know. I always say too, there's something about it if they keep taking it off, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was my question. Sorry to insert it 10 minutes later.
No, that's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked. That's awesome.
And you were really choppy when you were this last little part right before I asked my question, and you were talking about they dropped the one feast, the real feast, and they went with the pagan date. So the real one is in the fall or the spring?
The real beginning of the new year is in the spring on what is called Aviv 1.
Okay.
It's usually somewhere between the end of March to the middle of April.
Okay. And then you were saying that if anything's going to happen, it's going to happen on this date. Is that the one you were saying, or are you talking about something in the fall?
Talking about Yom Kippur. I'm talking about Yom Terua in the fall.
In the fall. Okay.
Yeah.
So Yom Terua is the correct it's in the correct spot on the calendar
Under the wrong name.
under the wrong name. They call it what now?
They call it Rosh Hashanah now.
Rosh Hashanah. Okay. They call it Rosh Hashanah, but it's really wrong.
YOM, Yom Terua.
Yom Terua.
Yeah.
And then what's in the spring? The
That
real Rosh Hashanah?
yes, correct.
Okay.
That would be Aviv 1. That's on Aviv 1. It's the head of the new
Okay.
year.
Okay.
Yes. But keeping in mind too, and I've already explained this, that people say, oh, we can calculate exactly when Yom Teruah is going to be now. No, we can't. Because if people cannot see the new moon, that's not going to be Yom Teruah.
Right.
So you
Right,
can,
if it's
you can look at the
overcast. I
lunar
mean,
chart all you want, but you still don't know when it's going to be.
last night I went outside. There's been so many times I've gone outside at nighttime because there's been some big thing that's supposed to be happening, either some type of an eclipse or a meteor shower or a comet or whatever, and I never see anything because we have all these clouds in the sky and it covers
Right.
everything up.
Yeah, exactly. So people, I mean, again, you can put it on your calendar and be like, this is going to be Yom Teruah, but you still don't know. You have to be, you have to be in sync with Israel. You have to know if it's been cited in Israel or not, because remember, they're doing this again.
So
And
it's
they
not
do-
like
So
it's not.
is there a way
It
to
doesn't matter what we
follow
see on our
people?
side of the world.
No, it doesn't matter what we see on our side of the world. What was that?
Oh, good point. So do you have a hookup? Like, where do we find who do we follow?
Yeah, they
to?
post it. They post it.
They
Those
do. Yeah.
carrot Jews.
Yes,
Okay.
and the Messianic Jews do also. So you have to, but remember, you have to be prepared. You have to be watching and waiting and logging in. And a lot of people want to know, right? There are people waking up to this and understanding that this is something we need to watch. And so a lot of people around the world are starting to log in, and you can read the records, by the way, of the old sightings and the old Avivs, like the ones that have already been proclaimed Aviv and whatever. Last year I think was the Adar bet we had last year. So we had a 13th
So
last year.
is that something, that link of wherever you log in or wherever you go to look for this stuff? Can we get that in the show notes or the wherever you call it
Yeah, I'll
on
write it down.
the YouTube channel?
Let's see if we can get that for you. Yeah, link to let's call it Tishri 1 sighting. Okay, that will remind
And
me.
you'd be looking for that. You would be looking for that in September.
Yeah, September, sometimes October. This year, it's going to be September.
Okay.
It's going to be around, what did we say, ladies?
I think it was September 19th.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But it
Well,
couldn't it
on
possibly
the
be
calendar,
over if it was just cloudy for like the next 12 days, or whatever.
But that's the day to start watching, I think. Is sundown on that day.
so is it possible that the Savior was born on the new year?
Yes. Yes.
If his birthday was April 6th, then it could have been.
Well, there's nothing that actually says his birthday is April 6th. And this is a controversial thing, and I haven't talked about it very much, but people extrapolate that because that's when the church was reorganized. And also, there are other things in there, but there's nothing that says in Doctrine and Covenants that that's his actual birthday. But you have to keep in mind that Christ was not born on a pagan calendar date.
Right.
So the interesting thing is to find out what is Christ's date on the Hebrew calendar. And there are a lot of Messianic Jews who believe he was born on the day of Tabernacles. That's Tishri 15 or something, the bride feast. I personally don't think that's the case. I think he was there's another huge segment of the population who thinks that he was born in the spring. I think he was born in the spring, personally, because the everything that he fulfilled already was fulfilled in the spring feasts. But that's a whole different call. But it's an interesting subject.
Well, it would make sense if you are talking about these feasts in this way, where if he came, the first time he came would be in the spring feast, and the second time he comes would be in the fall feast. I mean, that's a possibility, right?
Yeah, I always go with the shadow picture. The reason why some people think it's in the fall is simply because he tabernacled among men, and so they think he was born on the Feast of Tabernacles.
Right.
But the Feast of Tabernacles, remember, that's a bride feast. That's the bride, the bridegroom's wedding feast. So we'll get into that too.
So if I'm understanding these different things, the layers, then he would he have fulfilled the Feast of the Tabernacle maybe once when he was born, and then maybe another time when he.
It's possible, yes, and
later, and then.
Yeah, it's possible. I still don't think so, and I'll tell you a big reason why is because there were shepherds out in the fields. That's a spring thing, not a fall thing.
Right. Oh, I'm getting my tabernacles in the fall. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, I was using the wrong feast then. So yeah, the spring is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think it was in the spring, given different clues in the story and such. And also with the fulfillment of the imagery of the feasts. I personally think he was born in the spring.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. But also, I mean, at the time the April 6th date was given, a lot of people extrapolate this from Doctrine and Covenants 1 is where they're getting that. It's very possible that on that year, that could have been his birthday. But remember, his birthday is not April 6th every year on a pagan calendar. So excellent comment. All right, so I think we're done with the initiatory phase as far as anciently of Yom Terua. Now, how is this going to get fulfilled, right? How is this going to happen? Yom Terua is going to be obviously a very big date. This Yom Terua will kick off the final tribulations. So here we are again with the note, and underline it and asterisk it, that we're not there yet, because it's going to begin on Yom Terua, because the Lord does his thing. That's what he does. And side note, the angel Moroni handed Joseph Smith the golden plates on Yom Terua that year. Let's see, I've got the actual thing written down in my plethora of.
Isn't it September 22nd? Is that the date?
I was going to say, I think it's September 22nd, because 922 is a number that has meaning for me. And when I found out that there was a church history thing on that date, I was like, oh, so it's stuck in my mind.
All right. Yes, it was. So here's an interesting little deal. So the second vision, meaning when Moroni came to him that second time, that happened on the evening of the 21st of September, 1823. And that was on Tishri 15, 16, depending on what time of night he came. And that's the day of Yom Kippur. Let me look that up really fast. Make sure I didn't get that wrong here. 15. Where's my timeline? Hang on, guys. Give me 1 second here. Oh, here it is. Okay. So Tishri 15. That's the Tabernacles. That's the Feast of Tabernacles. Yeah. Feast of Tabernacles is the 15th of Tishri. So he came, Moroni visited on is going to be the Feast of the Bridegroom. Hang on, give me a second. I'm looking something really fast. All right, Sukkot. Okay, so yes, so Moroni came to Joseph Smith on Sukkot in 1823. And then, of course, he returned to him on the 22nd of September, every day after that. Because if you guys recall, he went up to the Hill Cumorah the day after that vision, which would have been the Hebrew next day, right? Because their days begin at sunset, blah, blah, blah. So I looked it up, and hang on, give me a second. I'm having a hard time reading my notes. Okay, so the first visit to Cumorah happened on the 22nd of September, 1823. and that was during Sukkot. He received the golden plates on the night of 22nd September, and that happened on Tishri 1. So pretty crazy. That was in 1827. And remember, Joseph Smith himself was actually born during Hanukkah, which was the Feast of Dedications of Restoration. Okay, so moving forward. So how that's going to be fulfilled, right? That's where we're at. Okay, so on that day, yeah, hang on one second, give me a second. Yeah, okay, just making sure I'm going through my notes here. On that day begins the 7-year tribulation. So whether or not the trumpets fit in there or the trumpets happen before there, I don't know. But that's going to begin the last 7 years. It's going to happen on Tishri 1. Any questions?
Is that, and isn't the abomination of desolation also going to happen on Yom Terua?
That happens 3.5 years in.
But not on Yom Terua?
That happens on Purim.
Purim, okay. Was it that the Antichrist was going to reveal himself on Yom Terua?
He reveals himself on, no, he reveals himself in Purim. Actually, you might be right. He might sit on there. Abomination, nope. He does that in Passover. So,
I don't think
okay,
I
here.
got it down correctly.
Okay, so it goes on Yom Terua begins the final 7 years. Okay, we're going to talk about this when we also talk about Yom Kippur, right? Because there's some really important things that happen with the fall feast, obviously, that year, whatever year that's going to be, that begins the final 7 years. 3.5 years into it, Purim happens. This is when the Antichrist is going to reveal himself. That is going, Purim happens, by the way, it's in Adar. It's in Adar. It's in the last month of the year, but it also could be Adar Bet if it's going to be a leap year. So again, we won't know until the barley is considered Aviv or not. We're not even going to know. That's going to be a surprise if it's going to be a 13th month. Then he's going to seat himself on the mercy seat on Aviv 15, Passover. So exactly 3.5 years into it. Remember how I talked about Daniel's timing and how he gives us exact days and months and such?
Yeah, I just think I put it correctly on my notes. I think I wrote it as Tishri.
Okay, well go back and check, because there are other things that will happen on different Tishris, just like what came up when Julie was talking. So there are different fulfillments that will happen on the same dates throughout those 7 years. But again, we'll talk about those when we talk about each of those feasts. Then we'll talk about the different layers. But like you said, Yom Terua, that's going to mark the beginning of the 7 years. And then at the end of the 7 years, of course, the final trumpet will blow on that day. That's also going to mark the resurrection. There are going to be many, as we already know. And what was I going to say about that? I was going to say something else about the blowing of the trump after the 7 years. Oh, yes. And many people say, oh, we're not going to know when that's going to happen. Okay, but we're going to know about when. Because remember that Christ can make that moon be invisible to man for as long as he wants it to. You know what I'm saying? But at the sighting of the first moon on that Yom Terua, on that Rosh Chodesh for Tishri 1, that is when the final trump will sound. That final trumpet is going to be done. Any questions? We're good?
I think I'm good. Does anybody else have questions? I think you answered all mine for now.
Okay. All right. Well, I will consider that a done deal then. I'm sure I forgot something. If I did, then I will just share that on Boxer. Okay. And Yeah. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks,
That's gonna do
Emily.
it. Yeah,
I
no
love
problem.
that. I'm gonna get this uploaded.
Cool.
to
Okay,
YouTube.
that's to do it for Yom Terua. Our next fall feast that we're going to go through is, what is it, guys? Oh, I know where to find it. It's going to be, I believe, Yom Kippur. I'm 90% sure. Let me make absolutely sure. Yes, let's see.
Another question, but it's completely unrelated. Do you want me to wait until you're done recording?
No, not at all. Yom Kippur is going to be the next one for sure. Yes, Tishri 10. So we're done with Tishri 1. We're gonna do Tishri 10 next. Okay, what's your question?
Well, actually, remind me what Tishri means again.
Tishri is the name of the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar, the one that was changed to Tishri.
Okay.
It used to be called 7th, but if you look it up on the Hebrew calendar, they call it Tishri 1.
Okay. And 7th, but they start in the spring, so 7th is in the fall, right?
Correct.
Okay.
September.
So September, October is what Tishri is.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so kind of related but not related, because this is speculation. I've watched a couple YouTube videos that one was a pastor talking about a dream he had, and he references September and
I've seen that one.
something Dana Coverdale or
Yeah.
Coverstone.
I've seen
And
it.
then I saw another one where it's a family and the dad does most of the talking. He's asking his daughter about a dream she had. She didn't know anything about Dana Coverstone and had never heard about that person's dream. And she had a dream that was very similar, where she was shown calendar, the calendar, and September was highlighted in red. And so was November, but November was highlighted in blue and September was in red. But she was also shown numbers, but she didn't know which months the numbers went to, but the numbers were 7, 11, 18, and 19.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting, the 18 and 19 part, especially because isn't that what our current calendar is calling Rosh Hashanah this year? So anyway, I was just wondering if is anything in the correct Hebrew calendar shows up on either September or November for 7 or 11 or 18 or 19.
Well, I mean, absolutely. Tishri. I mean, you've got Yom Kippur, Yom Terua, and Sukkot that all happen in September. As far as November, there's nothing that I can think of on the calendar there. But then you said 18 and 19. What I would do is I would start from Yom Terua and count and see what month that would spit you out at. Also keeping in mind there could be an Adar bet within that time. That's what I would do.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, I don't have an opinion one way or the other on either one of these people at this point. I just think it's interesting that there seems to be a pattern with people. People are getting similar messages, whether they're getting the messages from the right source or not, I don't know, but it's possible that they are. So I just thought that was interesting. Bunch of stuff about September, and we have some big days in September. So
yep, it is interesting. And every time I hear dreams like that, it always gives me chills because I'm always like, oh, is that gonna be the Yom Terua? Oh no,
Right.
Oh yeah. That's why I always jokingly say, every year that I'm like, I'm gonna keep my kids out of school, and then of course you remember, well, I don't know exactly when Yom Terua is gonna be.
Right.
We don't know.
Right. And just to refresh my memory, what is supposed to happen on Yom Terua again? When the big whatever thing happens, what is it?
Okay, so it looks like there's probably going to be a huge attack on Israel.
Okay.
Also, the beginning of this is going to be the first day of the last year of the 7-year tribulation, if there is a 7-year tribulation. Remember, we know for sure there's a 3.5 final year of the tribulation.
Right.
And people are extrapolating that there's going to be a 7-year tribulation given the shadow pictures that we have. For example, with Joseph and the dream that he interpreted of Pharaoh of 7 years of plenty, 7 years of horrendousness. So keeping that in mind, basically what I'm trying to say is, remember, we already talked about this with the timeline video. Many people think that we're already in the 7th seal.
Right. They think that we're almost at the 3.5-year mark where the woes are going to start in any day now.
Right, except that we know that there are going to be woes happening before that, right? So the
Right.
first half of the 7th year, 7 years, it says, the first half are like birth pangs where you're not quite sure, you kind of feel it, you know it's impending, but you're not quite sure. But at the same time, we're told it's going to be ugly, right? And I kind of feel like we're experiencing that right now. The question is, are we doing a rehearsal or are we in the final moments? But then again, that's the whole point. Are we in Braxton Hicks or are we giving birth here? What's going on? And so basically what I'm trying to say is we don't know if the horsemen, remember the 4 horsemen that cover the earth, the peace being taken from off the earth, the sicknesses and the economic troubles. We don't know if that's going to happen, if that's a part of the first half of the 7th year, or if that's the winding up to the final 7 years. We don't know that yet. And so what's going to happen in the Yom Terua, the one, is either is going to be those 4 horsemen being sent out, right? And Karen and Kristen have already pointed out, that could be simultaneous. Boom, 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 boom. There's nothing that says it has to do this and then a year and then this and then a year. Right. But that's why I always say, keep it in pencil, keep it in mind. Or is it going to be that blowing of the first trumpet? But you got to remember, guys, you have to remember this is pivotal. I'm going to say it one more time. We have to have you've got to have the 4 horsemen go out. You have to have martyrs dying for Christ. You must have the 6th one, remember, is geological upheavals. Horrendous things are going to be happening. Continents are going to be shifting. Continents that are currently under the ocean, they're going to be lifted up. Things are going to be put into place as it was before the flood. But it's a process. But all of that's going to start in the 6th seal. Trumpets haven't even happened yet at this point, right? And then the VIP find underground. Then you also, with those geological issues, ice will flow from the north. It says in Doctrine and Covenants, this will bring the 10 tribes down to the New Jerusalem. Then they will be residing there for a little while, right? They will bring their own scriptures and their prophets. So at this point, no more gleaning, right? This point, we're finally going to get the real harvest. And then at that point, 12,000 couples are chosen for each of the 12,000 of the 12 tribes. They are going to go to Adam on Diamond on what's called Spring Hill today. They are going to be given their special mission. Then they are going to lead everybody else willing to help. And then we go up to the final harvest. There is a silence in heaven for 30 minutes. Then the first trumpet, right?
Right.
So I can tell you guys, having been at Adam on Diamond, 2 weeks ago, it's a cornfield. Okay,
corn is not looking like severely trampled right now by like
no
144 feet.
Exactly.
Or what's that times 2?
I can tell you, it's a bunch of corn growing right on that hill. There's nothing else, just corn everywhere. And I loved it because there was wheat in the field, across the way. But I'm telling you, just like Christian just said, these people are going to be tangible. They're going to be trampling. There's not going to be a bunch of corn there. So
who owns the corn?
The church. The church.
Are they thinking about like mowing that and putting grass or anything? Or
yeah, when that happens, I think that's when it's time to be like, oh. But keeping in mind too, you guys, during that sixth seal is when that whole land of that whole part of Missouri and whatnot is going to be wiped out. That's got to happen first. All those quotes that I sent you guys, you know.
And remind me how, I know you've explained this. You know how in the church's student manuals, and it talks about the different seals and it gives the years from this year to this year, and then from this year to this year is this seal and all that.
Yeah.
Remind me how that is reconciled with this information that you know.
Because we have to remember things are layered, and it goes to the first 1,000 years in the first seal, because remember that on the scroll is written all the doings of man on that first 1,000 years on the scroll, including and especially the secret combinations and the shenanigans that they were up to. That was written down on the scroll. And so it pertains to each of the 6,000 years from the time that Adam and Eve left the garden up until the time that the scroll is going to be read out loud, and everyone's going to hear from the shouted from the hilltop, the housetops, the shenanigans of each of the dispensations. It is because it does pertain, because it talks about, it pertains to that initiatory phase of each of the 1,000 years. But what people don't understand is that we must also have a fulfillment phase of that rehearsal time. So in other words, the first 1,000 years, that was all about conquering and to go conquer. You think about what was happening during Adam's day. That's exactly what was happening. Satan was going around conquering the culture. That's exactly what was happening. So therefore, we have to have that a quick little rehearsal, fulfillment of that rehearsal happening to us before the trumpets. Remember, Joseph Smith said that everything John wrote in there, including the horsemen, none of that had happened yet, even as of Joseph Smith's day.
Right.
So that's how you reconcile, is that yes, it does pertain to the first 1,000. The first horseman pertains to the first 1,000 years, in that that was the rehearsal, and that we have to live through a quick little fulfillment phase of that horseman.
Right, that makes sense.
So once you understand the fall feast and the spring feast and all the feasts and everything, then when you start thinking like a Hebrew, then it starts making sense. And
Right.
like I already explained before too, that the mark of the beast doesn't have to be just one thing. It could be all of it. It could be many, many, many things. I suspect it's not going to be one thing.
Is it possible that the horsemen will go out of order?
It's not going to go out of order. What the only two possibilities, this is going by shadow pictures, the way they work, is that number one, they're either going to go in order, right? So conquering and to conquer, peace taken from the earth, economic issues, and illnesses, pandemics, epidemics, whatever. Or since they are 4 horsemen, they could be let loose and cover the earth at the same time. Good question. Any other questions?
And you said the 4 horsemen is to happen at the Yom Terua, or whatever, however you say that.
We don't know. We don't know, but we do know that Yom Terua is going to kick off the last of the 7 years. What I'm saying is we don't know if the horsemen happened before the 7 years or at the 7 years. We don't know if the seals, if all 6 seals, 7th even, because including that half an hour in heaven, we don't know if that happens during the 7 years or if that happens in its own 7 years, and then the trumpets have their own 7 years.
Right.
Like, speaking of, like, we're writing this in pencil, right? And there are things that we may learn as we go along. And I know it's controversial. Like, a lot of people don't think the the lost tribes will come out of a physical location. They think that it just refers to the gathering from all over, and that bringing their own records and prophets may imply other things, right? Like symbolic things. Do you think that
They haven't read very much on it then, because I already sent you guys tons of quotes that talk about where the prophets talk about there is going to be a group of people that have been hidden from the world of this entire time.
but they would say, wouldn't they, like that's more old quotes that are not in the modern manuals? Like
It's in the modern manuals. The stuff I sent you guys, most of it, if not all of it, is in the new manual.
the new manual. Oh, I know the one you're talking about. So you don't see that as one where it could be interpreted two ways and that we're writing that one in pencil. That's like a firm, like.
I think the prophets and apostles made that very clear. In fact, they even, in one of those quotes, I forget which one of them says, there's like, some people say it's going to be a gathering out of, people dispersed on the land. And he says, basically what I've already said, where he's like, that's trying to massage the scriptures and make it fit in a way you think it's going to work. And he said, no, it's going to be miraculous. They're going to come back as a group, period. So that's in the Institute manual, the Lost Tribes. That's where you can find that. And I sent it in the Voxer already, but if you want me to send you another link.
Okay, I'll go look again. Yeah.
And as
Somebody
far as,
sent me a bunch of contrary quotes, seemingly just as persuasive on the other side from modern people as well. And it's like,
well, you have to do personal revelation. That's all I can say. But in the Abrahamic Covenant, it's very clear, because it says that there's going to be ice breaking in the north at their coming. If you remember all the Abrahamic Covenant sections I told you to read, it's in there.
yeah, they had like an answer to that as well that I'll have to look. I don't know if you'd want to read it, but
I don't care. Thanks. I'm good. I've already studied that one for me and I'm good. But thank you. I appreciate it. And I was going to mention this one more time too, that the prophetic half an hour in heaven, some people are saying, it's 21 years. Again, if you look, you can go back to Ezekiel 4:6, Numbers 14:34. Those are two scriptures that reference that if you do the math in the Old Testament version of what time is and a prophetic hour is, it turns out to be 1 week. Remember, also could be 6 months. So it's going to be 1 week or 6 months, most likely. Any other questions about that? Nothing? Okay. All right. So I think we can call it a day. Yeah.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Thank you so much, Emily.
No problem, everybody. Okay. Next time we get together, we're going to go over Yom Kippur, Tishri 10.
Perfect.
So if you guys want to read up on that or study up on that first, you can do that. It'd be awesome. Okay. Thanks, everybody.